So I'm Duddy. I work as a lead metrics developer at HSBC. I work in our cybersecurity analytics department. So we've got our own Azure tenant, and we've got our own Power BI capacity, and I kind of help figure out what the architecture of that's going to be, and I'm currently in the process of setting up all of our DevOps processes. So this presentation is kind of related to that. So I'm going to be talking about the new PBI project format, and try and hopefully go from knowing nothing to knowing what that really looks like, and then finish off with how can we take that PBI project and deploy that to Power BI using the new REST APIs that come out for Fabric. So first of all, when we think about Power BI, we think about Power BI Desktop, PBIX files, and you feel it's a very well polished thing, but it's actually two things in one. So we've got the semantic model and the report, which are completely separate from each other. But if you ever run Power BI on your computer and you look at your task manager, you'll see instances of SQL Server going on in the background where this SQL Server analysis service tabular database is running. It's a column store database. I'm not going to go into that too much. It's kind of cool. And the entire thing is defined by this tabular object model, which effectively is the schema that is expected for that semantic model. So if we were to look at the object model Tom, there's a schema that defines everything that you'd expect to ever see in that database. So you can ignore the server and database because those are almost legacy from the multidimensional days. So those are AMO artifacts, but everything modeled down. This is Tom. If you go back in time, I think it's back to before compatibility level like 1200 or something. Everything that Tom didn't exist. So everything post that capacity level, compatibility level is defined by Tom. And there's a bunch of C# libraries that allow you to interact with all these things, and that's how all the different client tools are able to interact with Power BI. So things like DAX Studio, Tabular Editor, they all leverage those. So if we just kind of run through a few of these things quickly, just to kind of, because if you start using Power BI projects, all these different things are going to bubble up, and you will want to know what they are. So we have data sources, we've got tables. Within tables, we have columns, we have partitions. So that's the definition of data that populates the table. Measures, hierarchies, relationships. These are the kind of base things that you're going to care about. These few. There's a few more, but things like perspectives and that sort of stuff, but kind of more niche. And the way this is actually represented is in JSON. So a lot of Power BI is JSON. And I don't know if how many people are aware of model.bim. So model.bim is this Tom as JSON, and it's defined as being in this TIMSL format. So tabular model scripting language. So we can see we have our stability level, we've got a model, we've got our relationships, there's our relationships, we've got our tables, we've got our columns. So everything's defined like this. I don't know how many people know that you can actually unzip a Power BI file. Let's see what's inside, so we can do that quickly. Because effectively, this is what PBI projects does in a way. So if you go to report, so I'll be using this report for a few different examples. So I'll just introduce it quickly. So really simple. We just have a fact table, which has got a couple of columns and a date table, date column, a measure table with a measure, and just a dimension, and a page with a couple of visuals on. So if I open this in, so if I go up a level and just open this in VS Code, so we can see all the files. And let me know if any of this is too small. So if I take a copy of this report and paste this down here, I can rename this as a zip. If we go back to here, we can go in and we can see we've got a bunch of different files. If we actually want to go look at these, let's quickly extract this. And we can see we've got this data model. If you actually just look at this, I think this is all potentially base64 encoded. There's some sort of encoding, but effectively, I think this is your model.bim in some sort of format.
Jake, is there any chance you can increase the magnification? Because some people find it hard to see.
There we go. That better?
It's a little better, thank you. One more.
Okay. One more for good luck. Okay.
Cool, brilliant.
So if you go,
thank you.
Here. So if you go back to that data model, a whole bunch of gibberish, can't really do anything with it. The report is slightly better. So we have our report definition in our static resources, and this long line here of JSON is the definition of all our reports. So if we go across, we can see that we're calling up our static resources for the theme. We're defining that we have a page with this GUID, and then we've got the XY coordinates for different visuals. But then as soon as you start to get down to the actual configuration of visuals, you've got this horrible stringified JSON object, which isn't particularly useful to work with. So this is what you get if you open up Power BI projects. Does a very similar thing, except it allows these files to be in a format that is ordained by Microsoft. So you're going to have an exact schema, and also they're designed to be used with source control. So let's start with that. So we can have a look at what Power BI projects. So yeah, so the Power BI report is a binary file, and then it gets decompiled into a set of folder and files. So you can see if we were to save a Power BI PBIX file, would get a semantic model folder, a report folder, would get a git ignore file, and a PBIP file. This PBIP file just effectively calls points at this report folder. So Power BI desktop can open this in as like a regular file. The git ignore just makes sure that you're not versioning control the backup of the data. So you're only keeping track of metadata, not real data. So one thing to remember is these get split into separate items, and Fabric treats them as separate items as well. So you can publish just semantic models, you can publish just reports, you can publish whatever you like. I mean, you can have warehouses, notebooks, all those are individual Fabric items, and the API is going to treat these as individual things. We can look at the definition of the semantic models and reports. So if we were to look at semantic model, we've got a couple of options for how we want to see the metadata for those. So you've got the TIMSL version, so that's the JSON one that we just looked at, the model.bim. So we'd have just a model.bim file, or we can use the new TIMSL format. And what will happen there is you, instead of having this model.bim, you have this definition folder, and under that you would have folders for separate tables. Oh, but we can look at that in a second. And then the report, you've got the old style report.json. So that looks a lot like the version that we just saw in the unzipped PBIX. And you also have the new PBIR format, which has come out a few months ago. So the one thing to mention actually is this TIMSL format is now in general availability of like a week or two ago, which is fantastic. PBIR is still in public preview and has some limitations associated with it. So you can use it, but it may not be able to do everything you want, and there might be some limitations that you run into. The one thing to mention I'll quickly mention right now, that will become important later, is this definition.pbir file. This is the pointer to the data. So this definition, this file here will either have a file path locally to the semantic model, or it will have a web address in Fabric to where the semantic model is. If we're using the Fabric API, we have to supply the by connection version. We can't use the by path, so that's just something to keep in mind. But the best thing to do would be to look at that. So what we can do is save this as a PBIP. I'm going to save it as model.bim and report.json, so we can look at those first, and then I'll save it with the newer format so we can look and see what the difference is. So you can see in our report folder, we've got this report.report and this report.semantic model. So in the report.report, we're going to have our report JSON. So we've got a very similar, it's an identical version of the file that we saw before, except for the fact it's slightly nicer formatting. But we still have this stringified JSON for the different visuals, which isn't particularly nice. And we can look at that definition.pbir, so we can see that we have a path to that report.semantic model folder that we've just created, or we could provide that by connection if we had if we wanted to do a live connection to a report semantic model in the Power BI service. If we look at the semantic model, we can see our model.bim. And we can see that we just got, I'll just turn this into JSON. So we can see we've got all of our TOM objects. So we've got TOM model, we've got annotations, cultures, expressions. So you can see we've got, so in the expressions, these are the M query, Power Query pieces. So for example, we've got a parameter called parameter1, type M, and it effectively just says it has a value of local. We've got all relationships, tables, nothing too surprising. If we were to look in .pbi, we have a lot of these things we don't care about. So from both of these items, only a handful of them are actually mandatory for the Fabric APIs. So I've listed which ones are required. So definition.pism and model.bim or definition. These are necessary for semantic models. And then the report.json definition and the definition.PBIR are definitely required. You can tell exactly what you need by navigating to Fabric API docs. So under item management, you can see the PBIP format spec for Spark, jobs, notebooks, semantic models, and it will tell you exactly what is going to be expected by the APIs and exactly what the scheme of different things are. So that's that version. The main problem with it is if you're trying to do source control, because everything's all bundled into one place, it does mean that you can potentially run into merge conflicts and different problems. So what we can do is if we go into options and settings, we can turn on Timdal and PBIR. I have to turn this off and on again to actually let it turn on. And I'll just delete these while I'm at it. There we go. If we just save as PBIP to that folder, it should now have the new formats. So let's have a look. There we go. We have our definition folder instead now. So we've got a version. We've got the report definition. You can see that everything is, and then the pages before, which will string of under the page you have a page. You don't have a very human readable page name, but you can go in and, for example, turn this into page 1, and you'll be happy with that. And then you can just look at the definition of everything that exists in here. So you've got 3 visuals, and everything's broken out, so it's actually readable and usable, which is nice. The one thing to note is it has this dollar schema at the top. If you were to follow this, it would send you to a list of the entire JSON schema for every different item in PBIR. So if you ever want to know what you can do, what's happening, just follow those links. So that's the report. And then for the semantic model, you can see we've got our database, which just has a compatibility level. We've got this expression, so that's our M parameter again, so that local. Model.timdal, there's nothing particularly interesting here, except we're pointing out that we've got these tables, relationships, and then we actually have the Timdal here. So Timdal, instead of having JSON as before, we have a kind of YAML-like format, which is slightly more human readable. And also, if we have M or DATs, it's just here in well, if you had M or DAC before in the JSON version, it would be stringified like the JSON in for the config of the visuals that we saw for the report. But it's just here, easily editable. So if we wanted to change anything, we could potentially write our own M and do whatever we wanted here. One of the advantages of this format, which I quickly wanted to show, was that we can copy and paste things from other reports pretty easy. So one thing that you notice is this table, our fact table, has a date column, but we don't have a date table. So I've prepared a donor report. If we go into its definition, it has a date table, which is calculated from DAX. And we get to benefit from the fact that it's predefined. We pick up any formatting that we've done to it. And it's just simple as copying and pasting into our tables. The other thing we would need to do is create a relationship. I don't think it matters what you call this. And then we can say we're doing from fact date to dates date. I think it's that way around. If it doesn't work, then you can always just do this in the service as well. So the one thing is, if you make any changes in VS Code or whatever, you won't actually see the changes in Power BI itself unless you close and restart it. That's a limitation at the moment, but I think that's going to be, that's on the backlog to change, so that, for example, if you make changes in Tabular Editor, if you click Save, you see the changes populate into Power BI Desktop. So let's see if I did was valid. Okay, it didn't like my date table. I have a feeling it's because of the relationship. Let me kill the relationship. Open it again. Oh, you know what? Because I'm opening the desktop rather than the PBIP one. That's why I open up the old version. There we go. We've got a new date table, and for example, our year month. We can look at that. We can see it's got a custom. Well, I think I forgot to put the custom format on, but there we go. You can just copy and paste things through. But we can make changes the other way as well. So what I will do is I will turn Git on for this folder so we can see our card changes. So I'll do a initial commit, all this stuff. That's because I've got this open. Okay, that's all staged. Perfect. So that just means that we've just saved the folder up to that point. So if we make any changes, we'll be able to see them happening there. So let's make a couple of changes. So let's add a new measure. And let's just add, let's just update our visual. So let's just put year month on here or something. Year maybe. There we go. So we've updated the semantic model with a new measure and the report with an updated visual. And we can see that we've got some changes. So we've got our new measure has been added. We've got a new date table. We've got it auto created Oh, it's because I played around with this one. And we can see that we've also got an update to the visual where we have small multiples on year. There we go. So let's get back to my presentation and move on to the Fabric API. So right now, if you want to deploy PBIP projects, you've got two options. You've got the built-in Git integration, and you can set up a repo in Azure DevOps or GitHub now, and you set up a direct connection between a branch and a workspace, and Microsoft takes care of pushing your folders and files to that workspace and creating the semantic models and reports. The other option is using these REST APIs. So these are HTTP actions where we give a definition of a Fabric item, creating a new item, or we're updating a definition, and we're sending that over the web to create those items. So this is kind of what it ends up looking like. So we say for a specific workspace, we want to update a definition of a particular item. We're saying that we're going to send some JSON, which is UTF-8. We need to authorize you by giving a bearer token. So this is created by us by authenticating against Azure, and we're giving the entire definition. So in this case, we're doing a semantic model, and we're supplying a model.bim, a diagram layout, and that definition.pbir. So technically only the definition.pbr, model.bim are required in this case. The one thing that you'll see that's a bit interesting is that we're providing the actual payload, the file in this base64 format, just so it's more compressed. Microsoft has been kind enough, and I think it was mostly Rui Romano, to create some example commandlets which were available on the Analysis Services GitHub, which allows you to authenticate and do these deployments. So we can have a look at what that looks like right now. So in this repo, I have a script. Well, so first of all, I have that that PowerShell module that was provided by Microsoft here, saved in the stock module folder without any changes. At work, I'm using Linux containers to do deployments. So the one thing you have to notice, you have to do if you're using Linux, is go through and flip everything, all the paths, which is a pain. So we've got a fairly simple script here. We're providing our tenant ID. I'm providing a deployment environment because if we were using DevOps, we might want to deploy into, say, a dev, UAT, or production workspace and do different things depending on where you're deploying. First thing is we need to install that module, so we have access to the commandlets. We authenticate. Normally you do this with a service principal. In this case, I'm just doing this as myself. There's a few different ways. You can use service principal with a secret and client ID, or you can use a certificate. A few different options. In my version here, I've set it up so that we have this thing called a deployment manifest, which is similar to what Matthias does for PBI tools, which is an open source solution for deploying PBIX files. So I define based on which environment I want to deploy into, which workspace my items are going to end up into. Going to end up, and also this module has a commandlet for I'm going to find this. Yeah, so there is a commandlet here for setting semantic model parameters. So these are Power Query parameters that we can overwrite. The one thing that you'll see here is we have this Microsoft Analysis Services tabular.json serializer. This is actually using isn't using Power Query PowerShell. This is using the C# libraries. So at the very top of the script, it actually goes through and installs the main C# libraries from NuGet, and they are called with that's this square syntax. So you're not limited to what the Fabric APIs can do. You can do everything possible. So you can do C# scripting or whatever in Power Query in PowerShell as part of the PyDI deployment. So the point I was getting at was, if I'm deploying into prod, I can, for example, overwrite that parameter 1 that I had with production, UAT, or dev, depending which environment. And it could be something like you have a parameter called filter, and then in dev and UAT, maybe you only want to see the top 1,000 rows or something, and so you can do smaller refreshes in those environments than do full whack elsewhere. So if we go here, we can see we scan through that deployment manifest, figure out what environment we're in, and overwrite and call that set semantic model parameters and overwrite the files. It then picks up the workspace name. It's going to go and use the API to figure out what the ID of that is in service, and then it's going to do a deployment, and it's going to detect whether or not that item already exists. If it exists, it will update its definition. Otherwise, it's going to create a brand new item. So if we just play this, well, actually, I will open that workspace. You can see that it's empty to start with. There we go. Birmingham user group, completely empty. The way that this script works is it scans through all your files and it looks for the .pbir formats and something else to figure out which folders contain semantic models and reports. So it figures out which folders it should be trying to work upon. So it's going to deploy both the report that we've been looking at, but also that donor report that I stole the dates from. We just click run. So here we go. It's figured out there's 4 items because we've got 2 semantic models, 2 reports, and it's going to start creating those payloads, which is going to push through the APIs. One thing to note is we're only deploying the definition of these items, not the actual data. So if we were to go to this report, we'll see that we don't have any data yet. You also, because we deployed with PBIR, we're going to get this warning as well. So what we can do is just go back here and we can call a refresh on the report. It's probably not going to be happy with me because I've defined the data bit to be in Excel, so that's going to fail. If I had a gateway and I could connect this report's M to that gateway and pick up the Excel, and it'll do the refresh and pull the data into that report. The one thing that I mentioned earlier was that the API needs a bypass connection, not a bypath. So if we go and have a look at that again. So in our report definition, we have this definition of PBIR, and we're pointing by path at semantic model. There's in this module, it will detect if there's a bypath, and it will deploy all of the semantic models first and keep a track of the deployed semantic model ID, and then populate that by connection. So in this case, this is handled for you if you use this module. If you're deploying a report in one workspace and a semantic model in another workspace, you're going to have to sort out this by connection to have the right format. But we can see what that would look like by going again to the semantic model definition. Would it be in a report definition? Maybe this one. So do we have by connection? A semantic model, that would be why. So here we go. So this is what, so we had the by path here, where we have the path, and then we have by connection, where we give the connection string. So you can see we're saying we're connecting to this workspace, and we're connecting up to a specific semantic model. And you can just get that quite easily. So if you go to so this is one of our semantic models, for example. If you go to settings, you should be able to go to server settings, and you can get that string that you can use to populate that by connection. And I think that's it. So I don't know if there's any questions.
If anyone put any questions in the chat, or take yourself off mic, it was really interesting.
Hey Jake, this was a really good demo. So yes, I've learned so many new things on this one. The PowerShell script, is that basically, do you basically run that inside of your repo in ADO?
Which one? Sorry.
This is
so that this one from Microsoft.
Yeah.
Or
this part.
So
well,
this is. So in my repo, there would be this. I'd have this Fabric, this module, right? But then you would also have a pipeline, and so this pipeline is what runs that PowerShell script. So would connect up. We would say what branches would trigger this pipeline, and if it decides it's going to run, it's going to go to Key Vault, it's going to get some secrets, and it's going to use this key vault to use a service principal instead. But effectively, it's going to do almost exactly the same thing, and just run that in the cloud. So it's just going to be effectively a virtual machine in the cloud that runs that PowerShell for you.
I see.
When you think of pipelines in the cloud, I think a simpler way is just imagining that you're spinning up a brand new machine. So it's think of it as running just a Docker container. So you can do whatever you want to do really. So it creates a brand new machine. You can open files, you can go in and change values, you can move things around, and yeah.
So
it's really
would
flexible.
we need to actually first build the pipeline, and then after that, then do a release of that pipeline, or it's just a build, and then we can basically just run the PowerShell script?
So you don't have to build. You're not compiling anything. You're effectively just doing deployments. So the way that you would really set this up is you'd copy everything that you have here into a repo, so into like your main branch. And then depending on what your schema is, because it might be that you just use, say, trunk-based, in which case you'd create a branch for your feature, you make whatever changes. This Azure pipeline would exist in there, and you would have so in this case, this is a CI trigger, and you wouldn't have this release branch. But if you did a pull request into your main branch, this pipeline would just kick off by itself because it's detected that there's been a change in the main branch, and it would just deploy for you.
See.
I did do a talk at the Devon and Cornwall Power BI user group where I went more into branching, which might be useful.
Cool. Thanks.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, Jake. One from Tim. When a user tries to open a report from their local Git link folder, it defaults to bypath in the PBIR. Is there a way to change this setting to by connection other than manually changing each report link to a model? Apparently, this is a default behavior according to Microsoft documentation, but with the bypass setting, simple report modification will result in trying to import all the model data locally.
You'd have to do it to by connection so that you have a live connection to the service.
Yeah. You have to manually change each report link to a model. Okay.
Or you could do that thing with the parameters filtering, so that if it's local, then you're only hydrating a small amount of data. That's an option. It depends what you want to do.
Okay, cool. One from Colin. Could you share your thoughts on the scenarios where you'd use this for deployment? E.g., what are the triggers that make you move from regular desktop service to this style of environment?
So I think the reason that you'd swap to this is there's quite a few different ones. So having Git by itself is very valuable, because if you were just using Power BI Desktop, and for example, if I changed some visuals, I accidentally deleted something, that might be gone forever if I'm just saving over the file, or I might not notice it disappeared at some point in time, because you might save a different version of, like a version 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't know when that disappeared. You don't know what's really happened. So you get the advantages of Git and source control and being able to see exactly what happened, and you can easily revert changes. You also get the benefit of the fact that you go from having only one person being able to work on a report at a time to multiple people being able to work on separate branches and then merge the results. So it could be that you have 5 people working on one report and they're just working on different pages, and you can merge all those changes together at the end, as
that's
opposed
good.
to having to wait for
Yeah.
one person to do their work, then another, and just keep passing that file down the line. Or
Yeah,
someone's
that's
done
good.
some work and yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've got one more question. I think somebody had their hand up. I think it was James Conway, I think. Jason, not James. Do you want to take yourself off mute, Jason, and ask the question?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jake. My questions, I suppose, vary slightly off topic exactly to what you've just gone through. I'm kind of looking at trying to implement a bit of source control for other fabric items at the moment, warehouses, lake houses, that sort of thing. Just wondered if you toyed around with any of that. I know we had, well, there's a Matthias has brought out a tool, is launching a tool to do source control and cross workspace movements for all that sort of stuff. But I just wondered if there's anything out of the box that anyone's kind of already aware of.
I've not touched it, but I think I've seen Kevin Chant do some stuff with backpack deployments of warehouses. So
Okay.
there's stuff out there, but I've not really dived into it much.
All right, thank you. I'll take a look.
Yeah, I'd say for like Fabric, it's not a very mature API yet, and it's not a very mature deployment sort of source control sort of environment with lots of things not supported and stuff like that. It's very hard at the moment. So
Yeah,
we're having to just manually do quite a lot of things. We have a Confluence page with a deployment checklist, which is getting longer every day for the more and more complicated deployments, sadly. Cool.
yeah. Hopefully Microsoft will step in and improve things soon.
Yeah. Hopefully, because if there's a number of consultants are going Fabric first and have been for a few months, so they're having to address the challenges quite manually, as we are at the moment. But yeah, the feedback I think from some people is that it needs to be a lot more robust and a lot more scalable.
Yeah. I'm glad it's not just me.
No. Got one more question from Emmanuel. How was source control handled prior to the PBIP format being introduced?
So source control prior to then was not Microsoft supported. So there was a few solutions. So on the semantic model side, you were able to use Tabular Editor to create either model.bim or a folder structure, and also you had PBI tools, which could also deal with reports, but the format of those are slightly different from PBIP. So PBIP is kind of its own thing. Microsoft was very careful to kind of knew that all these things were happening and didn't make too many changes, so all these pieces kept working. But now this is fully ordained, so
yeah,
there should be a lot. It's a lot safer for those guys to build tools that are going to keep working and be robust.
Yeah. I remember with Power BI template files as well, because it doesn't store the data, does it? It just stores the model. And you can sort of source control a little bit, but it's very clumsy as a whole
it's more
file
version
thing.
control, right?
Yeah.
It's more version control rather than source control.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Cool. Has anybody got any other questions? Come off mute or type in the chat.
One thing to mention though is the reason that you might use this Fabric API over Git integration is you get a lot more flexibility. So, for example, you can overwrite these any definitions. I've got a blog post where I use like a Git submodule to import a theme from a donor report on the fly.
Cool.
So that you've got loads of different possibilities, and
Yeah.
you're not so tied into that kind of very simple deployment. And it could be that you want to have one repo that deploys different items to different workspaces, which you can't do with Git integration. It's everything. That repo has to look exactly like what you want your workspace to look like.
Yeah. Cool. Right, Ross asks, can you distribute the slides for this, please, Jake?
I will put them on my GitHub.
Oh.
So I've got a blog called Evaluation Context. So
that's a great blog name.
Man, I'm surprised no one had taken it, but I have my. I think I've got my Git. Yeah, my GitHub links here. So I'll lob it, throw it all on here.
Cool, brilliant. That's fantastic, Jay. Thank you. If there's no more questions, I just want to say. Oh, sorry, was going to say something, Jake?
I was going to say some. Yeah. So good thing about Git is you get this whole blame history as well. So if you go to any of these, you can see these are all committed just now. But you can see every line who did what over time. So those are the kind of benefits you get.